Good morning, everyone. This webinar will go about claw health in the dairy sector. In the R4D project, we are working on resilience. So resilience, this is the ability to withstand or to recover quickly from stress situations, and also the ability to adapt to new situations. This is very important in all kinds of situations, all kinds of sectors. So also for the dairy sector. One of the stress factors is claw disorders. There was a researcher that stated that about 75% of cows in Europe are affected by claw disorders in their lifetime. So this is a lot, actually. So it is very important to work preventive, like a regular claw trimming and also a good claw trimming. And also an early detection of the problems. If a farmer is, for example, very good in mobility scoring, he or she can see quickly when a cow has claw problems, and then he or she can work quickly to work on this claw disorder. We have a project, a Vlaio project, ClawCare. It started in 2020 and it will end at the end of this year. And we are looking for innovative tools for curative and preventive hoof trimming. It has three main topics: the early detection of claw lesions by thermal imaging, also the evaluation of preventive hoof trimming methods. What is the perfect method or the best method for hoof trimming? And we also check the effectiveness of active substances that are often used in footbaths. I invited William for a talk on this webinar, as he also has a lot of knowledge about claw diseases and also works on the ClawCare projects. So I will give the floor to William.
Hello, can everyone hear me? All right. Can everyone hear me well? Just to confirm, okay. Yeah, so in the next 25, 35-ish minutes, I'll try and give you a brief overview of what we're doing within the ClawCare research project, what we've been working on and what's still planned for the next year, and also some challenges that some of you might also have found in the field working with lameness in dairy cows. So it's a pretty big project. There's quite a lot of parties involved, and I'm mainly involved within the party for the University of Ghent, the veterinary faculty. I'm also most involved with data collection, with hoof trimming in practice on farms, with visiting farms, and as Sandra said, with having a little bit of a centralized data or knowledge center at the faculty about lameness, hoof trimming, everything which causes a cow not to walk well. We have the people from Hoogent who are mainly support. They help out with data collection and also with practical organization. People from ILVO, which is the Institute for Agriculture and Fisheries Research in Flanders. Well, I like to call them, they're the tech people, the tech guys. They're the ones involved with all the very fancy high-end AI machine learning models, everything basically that makes a computer work, which I'll get back to in a second. And then finally, we have Inagro and Hoof. They're both involved in communication dissemination. Inagro is also working on footbath products, because it's a question we receive a lot from farmers from different countries, is what is the best product to put in a footbath? What am I allowed to use? What am I not allowed to use? What is allowed by European Union? And just a little bit of an overview of who I am, so you guys just get a brief idea. I graduated 3 years ago at the University of Ghent in veterinary medicine with a specialization in bovine or ruminant medicine. And I started working 2 weeks after graduating on the ClawCare research project. And I've been quite active over the last 3 years in hoof trimming, both in Belgium, but also internationally. Had the opportunity to present some of my research in the United States at the Lameness in Ruminants conference last year. And then this year, I was invited by multiple hoof trimming organizations in Europe to present some of my research and to do practical work with the hoof trimmers. Because if we're talking about lameness and hoof trimming, a lot of people know or acknowledge that it's an issue or a challenge, but very little people also acknowledge and give enough credit to the guys who are actually trying to fix it or play a big or very important role, and that's the hoof trimmers. And it's also, I suppose, why lameness still remains a big challenge on dairy farms. So the first innovative tool within ClawCare that we're working on, and that's between mostly Ilvo, who's doing the technical support, and then myself with data collection and interpretation, is using thermal imaging as a tool to automatically detect certain types of hoof lesions. The initial idea was to have a thermal imaging camera that could be used by a farmer or a hoof trimmer while trimming a cow's foot. In the cases where he'd know that the cow is lame, but he couldn't find a lesion right up during hoof trimming, he'd pull out a thermal imaging camera, take a picture of the foot, and it would help him or assist him in telling him, oh, you have a little hot spot on this side of the foot, you should look into it. Well, after the 2 first years of the ClawCare project, we also saw that data collection is well, challenging, A, and B, the additional value of a tool like this during hoof trimming is actually, there's very little benefit, because someone who's well trained, in 90-95% of the cases, he will find a reason or a cause, a lesion that explains the lameness. That's why we shifted to a more automated detection system. And this is, well, in our current setup, we take thermal imaging pictures of the hind feet of cows before they go into the hoof trimming crush. Then they get trimmed, which gives us the hoof lesion or the diagnosis of what's wrong or what's good with this with the feet. And then we, together with Ilvo, we built a model where currently it has the ability to detect digital dermatitis, and the accuracy in the first data set that we have with the first model that we have is around 70%, which in my opinion, if you automate this, you can even augment the accuracy, because you get well, you get a kind of timeline. You get cows that pass in front of a thermal imaging camera twice a day, for example. If it's in a robot farm, cows ideally go in the robot 3 times a day, and you can start following up and put a timeline to it. And it helps a farmer, because DD is a major issue. We know this digital dermatitis is one of the, or is the most prevalent infectious hoof disease on dairy farms. It's also one of the most challenging ones, because not many people recognize it in time. And having an automated system that helps out and sends, in turn, when it's implemented, a message to the farmer's smartphone and tells them, oh, this cow has an issue on the back foot. You need to look at her in a hoof trimming crush and provide treatment. So that's the first thing we're working on. And yeah, as I just said, is currently the first results are promising. We're still not done yet, and we're going to keep working on it and try and increase the accuracy. But 70% accuracy is already a good start, especially considering the challenges we faced and we are still facing. Well, we'll keep working on it to try and improve it further. So that's work package 1. Work package 2 is the one where I'm working on. It's mostly preventive hoof trimming. And the biggest challenge is that there's very little known about hoof trimming. In literature, I think there's 4 or 5 peer-reviewed papers that are published about hoof trimming. But it always refers to the same handbook or book, and that's the Dutch method by Toussaint Raven from 1977. But in the last 40 to 50 years, cows have changed quite a lot. So the big question is it still up to date? And well, as a start within the ClawCare project, I wanted to figure out what's the structure, how is hoof trimming looking like in Belgium? Challenge is we don't have a hoof trimming association. There's no training center, and there's no national recording scheme. The national recording, I'll get back to it. This is something from Scandinavia, where they see that it has some good results. So I started with the idea was to just have a small survey to see how many hoof trimmers are active, what their perception is on preventive hoof trimming. Unexpectedly, it got a bit bigger than I thought, and 325 hoof trimmers or veterinarians all over the world decided to participate. Just to give you an idea, these are the countries marked of the people who participated. And as I said, in Belgium, we only have 2 people who participated. I mean, funnily enough, in Ukraine, there's 3 that participated, and these guys are right now. And in Belgium, so it's only 2. So it's still, yeah. We're not a very big dairy country, but to give you an idea, Belgium has 500,000, a little bit more than 500,000 dairy cows. So these guys have a lot of work, which is also now 3 years later what I know from having spoken to a couple of hoof trimmers in Belgium. Most of them their calendars are filled 2 months in advance, and there's just very little of them. Well, just to give you a brief overview of some results of the survey that I had. So majority of the people that I managed to reach were hoof trimmers and veterinarians, because especially in other European countries and in Belgium, it's also starting to grow. More and more veterinarians get interest in hoof health, hoof trimming, and lameness management, because they either regulatory or just within their practice, they see that their business model based on selling veterinary products or medicine is decreasing, or it's changing because of a changing regulation. For example, in Italy, veterinarians, I think, are only allowed to prescribe, and they don't actually build a business model around selling medicine to farmers. And that's why some of them rebranded and specialized more in hoof trimming, because that's an aspect where they are allowed legally to provide better service than a regular hoof trimmer. Just because it's, when you have complicated cases, as a veterinarian, you're allowed to do surgery, you're allowed to use certain or perform certain veterinary acts that a hoof trimmer is not allowed to perform, which is another thing I'll get back to, is the legal side of hoof trimming. In the entirety of Europe, I'd even dare to say the world, it's a very big gray zone, because technically everyone here who's following this webinar tomorrow, everywhere in Europe, maybe not in the Scandinavian countries, is allowed to say, I am a hoof trimmer, and allowed to visit farms and trim feet, which is a weird thing, because you're not always, or you don't always have the right amount of experience. Well, another thing which is good and maybe not as good to see is that a lot of the people who I reached were very experienced, had more than 20 years of experience hoof trimming. But that was also the biggest group, which means once these guys retire, if there's not sufficient or enough younger hoof trimmers that join, there is already a shortage, but the shortage of hoof trimmers is going to be even bigger. I had a question about where they learned hoof trimming, and it was quite good to see that majority of the people that participated followed a recognized course. Well, of course, as with any survey afterwards, you always think, I could have asked this question or this question, I should have rephrased that one. But I wanted to keep it very accessible for everyone. But one downside is there's only very little people that followed a course in a recognized hoof trimming school, because there are not as many as there should be, and they're not always reachable, or people aren't always up to date with what's going on hoof trimming wise. But as with farriery, for example, it's the same with hoof trimmers. Is they start out as a helper for a hoof trimmer, which the older, more experienced hoof trimmer trains and teaches them. At some point in their career, they decide to follow a course to improve their knowledge, and that's how they stay updated. But still, and that's what I get from feedback from the hoof trimming community in general, is there is very little provided. And this was more specifically for me for further research to see what's being done during hoof trimming. And good thing is there is a trend towards the Dutch 5-step being, say, the gold standard, or the method being used the most within the hoof trimming community, which is well, it's a good thing. It's a start. It's not a widely fractured environment, which is good to try and generate progress, but also for research, it narrows down the scope of methods I have to look at. And then in the rest of the survey, I had some other questions about trimming methodology and end results. So how should the ideal hoof look like according to experienced practical experts, being the hoof trimmers, and that's where results diverged a little bit. There's a lot of differences between hoof trimmers. So, for example, I asked them to rank the 5 steps of preventive hoof trimming from 1 to 5, and I had 64 different combinations, where step 1 differed in 64 different possible ways, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. So there's a lot of differences. Hoof trimmers adapted a lot of the original teachings to fit what they do in the field, how they work in the field, but also the end results. What should the ideal hoof look like is also there was a wide spread on the answers. So that's why I'm following up on this first survey. I'm currently starting up a Delphi study, which is a Delphi study is nothing more than a study with a select or smaller group of experts, both academical and practical, being for the practical experts, the hoof trimmers. And the goal of the Delphi study is to reach a consensus, which means it tries to narrow down the difference and tries and generate, according to the knowledge that we have right now, hoof trimming should be performed according to the consensus guidelines that come out of this Delphi study. So it's a study that has multiple rounds where there's multiple different types of questions that are asked, and based on the input of the experts, different questions are regenerated and resent out to the same experts that they can evaluate in terms of over the different rounds to get a consensus. I had another thing, because it's also based on some practical things that I saw in the beginning. And another thing I did next to hoof trimming was just lameness perception, because before hoof trimming, the most important step is to detect or see an animal as lame. Unfortunately, as long as a cow is not perceived as lame, she's no action is undertaken unless it's just regular preventive routine protocol, which might not always be ideal. So one of the questions I had is, how well do untrained observers And in this in this setup, untrained is classified for me as non-ROMS certified, which is the golden standard in the UK. So I made, well, I used 10 clips of cows that walk by that can be scored from 0 to 3. There's a brief explanation of what score 0 to 3 equates to. And the good thing is those 10 clips comes from a larger database that was scored by 7 experts, and they had 100% inter-observer agreement. So that means that all 7 experts agreed on the score or the mobility or locomotion score for that animal in that clip. Just to give you a brief insight, this is freely accessible on online. I use this scoring system. Why? Because there's a very strong body of evidence. It's validated and it's used as a gold standard in the UK, and because it's something that it's easily usable on farm, both by farmers, by veterinarians, by laymen who are trained. You just score a cow while she's walking around, and you don't have to score her twice, standing still and walking around, as is with other locomotion or scoring charts or systems. And then some of the results from these are also in, and I'm going to be presenting these at the European Pediatrics Congress in Berlin this summer. Is as is expected and also seen in a couple of other studies, is healthy cows, which are score 0 or mobility score 0 cows, are well recognized as healthy. Score 1 cows, they aren't lame yet, or they aren't lame, but they're also not healthy. They're in between. It could be that within 2 weeks the cow becomes visibly lame, but it could also be that, for example, because the floor might be wet or a little bit slippery, or she's been lying for a couple of hours on a hard mattress, that she's a little bit stiff, and that's why her gait isn't perfect. So these cows aren't lame, but they're let's see, orange. They're not completely healthy. Those are also pretty well recognized as not lame. And then we get to the challenging part. So score 2 cows, that's where most of the mistakes happen. And I'll zoom in a little bit on those in the next slide. But score 3, those are the severely lame cows. Score 3 on 3. You can't go higher in the mobility scoring. And the good thing is these are also, these are well recognized by untrained scorers. But the biggest issue or challenge is with those score 2 cows that aren't perceived as lame. So what happens, most of them are recognized as score 1 or score 0, and nothing gets done with them. So they just get, cow is not lame. Okay, no action needs to be taken. She will be put in a hoof trimming chute or crush on her maintenance trim, or it's a story of, in practice, what happens, these cows aren't seen as lame. They keep walking around while being lame, and it's just a matter of time before they become seriously lame. So they become score 3, and then action gets undertaken. Which, as people of you who have experienced with hoof trimming, you'll know that lesions then become far worse or severe and harder to actually completely heal or treat. So, and that brings me to general impressions that I have so far, based on data collection, but also talking with different organizations in the last 2.5, 3 years. Is some countries have a very good structure to support hoof trimmers, and I'm thinking mainly on the Scandinavian countries, which are, I think, also supported by European funding and overseeing. But other countries, there is absolutely nothing, and it's a little bit of a free-for-all. Some highly skilled people have a very filled agenda, and then some maybe not as skilled hoof trimmers also have a very filled agenda because there's no one else. But I'm not always 100% sure if that's a good thing for animal welfare, because bad hoof trimming does lead to a lot of issues on a dairy farm. Wouldn't be the first farmer that asks the hoof trimmer to come to his farm. The entire herd gets trimmed, and then after the herd trim, he has more lame cows than before. That's not a those are not basket cases. Those are things that happen, I think, a little bit too frequently, unfortunately. But it's also understandable. There's a lack of veterinary support. I think me being a veterinarian, I'm the first one to stand behind that. Is training and just knowledge of hoof health and hoof trimming in veterinarians is a big issue. There's a huge lack. There's a legal gray zone. As I said, everyone can become a hoof trimmer. And there's also a lack of centralized and standardized database. As long as you don't have any data, any numbers, you don't know where you're at, farm or herd wise. You can't measure any progress. And that's where, if I look at what's being done in milk recording, for example, the setup is we're a couple of years ahead when it comes to somatic cell count and milk recording in a lot of countries, but also because there is a legal aspect to it, supported by the European Union, also with very strict guidelines. And there's also room, at least in Belgium, there's a major room for improvement in lameness, and it starts with just awareness of the issue in all the stakeholders that are part of a dairy, the dairy industry, but also quality training and support to the people in the field who are trying to solve the issue one cow at a time, to put it bluntly. So just to get back to ClawCare, the one thing I'm currently working on is the evaluation of preventive hoof trimming. That's where we use a pressure plate that's actually used in human medicine to measure pressure under the human foot. I use it to measure the pressure under a bovine foot. Just to give you a brief overview, I'm not going to go into specifics, but on the left you can see the pressure image of a bovine foot before trimming. So this pressure measurement here is an inside claw, and then the one on the bottom is an outside claw, and this is before trimming. And then after trimming, so making sure the sole is flat, correcting overgrowth and modeling. You see that the typical pressure hotspot, which is this little red zone here, it doesn't disappear completely. You still have one here, and you also have a small one here in the heel and then here in the tip. But you see that it's removed from the typical spot where you see your sole bruising and your sole ulcers. So just to show you what I'm working on and how within ClawCare we evaluate what's being done with hoof trimming. So if we go a little bit further, this is a big discussion within the hoof trimming, let's say the little hoof trimming world, is should you do a big model or small model? And just to show you, for example, what it translates to on a biomechanical aspect. Before trimming, you see that the majority of the pressure is located on the heel. This is due to overgrowth of a hoof or a claw. After just a standard trim according to the Dutch method, with a small model, you manage to engage the entire surface of the foot or of the hoof more actively, but you still have that little pressure spot here on the heel on the side of the outside claw. But if you take the same foot and you put a larger model and change the angle a tiny bit, you see that within the outside claw, majority of the pressure is more evenly distributed over the weight-bearing wall of a foot. So just briefly, just to show you what we're working on, what it does, what it results to, and that brings me to nearly the end. It's some additional deliverables that I have, or we have within ClawCare, is to try and have some data on the lesion prevalence in Flemish dairy farms. Challenge is, as I mentioned before, is there's very limited data, but there's also, and that's from more the farmer side and some hoof trimmer side, there's a little bit of a, what I call an omerta, is people are very afraid to talk about those kind of data because there's public perspective. I think farmers in the Netherlands and Belgium, they're already under quite a big, let's say, public opinion pressure because of everything related to emission and environmental challenges. But there's also, on the other hand, the consumer expectations. Most of consumers, when you ask them, and this has been done in research, is how should welfare be on the farms where you get your animal produce from? And most of them, or almost all of them, will say, yeah, well, we want high welfare farms, whether meat or dairy or poultry, pigs, doesn't really matter. But consumers, they do expect that their animal produce comes from farms that have a higher or a high animal welfare. And that's where it gets difficult, is because you need to I think, and that's, you need to start somewhere with some type of data to try and show what the current status is, but also show change and improvement over time. That's what they've been doing in Scandinavia, where they have a national recording system for hoof lesions that's used by pretty much all the hoof trimmers. Farmers get subsidized if they can show that their cows are trimmed at least once a year by a trained certified hoof trimmer, and it's recorded in that national recording program. But this is a thing I think could be interesting for the future, to have this on a European level, because collecting data is one thing, but then analyzing and interpreting data to give to give something very concrete to the farmer to be able to improve on his dairy farm, that's a whole other story, and it's one that's a little bit more challenging, because the people who collect most of the hoof trimming data, which being hoof trimmers, don't always have the tool or capacity, and this boils down to purely intellectual capacity. They don't always have knowledge or communication skills to track back to the farmer or the farms they work on to tell them, well, that's the issue, this and this are the cause, and these are potential solutions, and it's an whole other ball game to try and solve lameness on a dairy farm. And the other thing is the entire legal aspect, and this is on a European or even say worldwide level, but we'll stick with the EU for now. Is there is literally nothing. If you go the somatic cell count approach, for example, on the European level, there is very clear defined cutoff values that are set. And the dark truth, or the biggest challenge with lameness and other animal welfare benchmarks, is the reality is none of them, or very little of them, have an effect on quality. Let's say quality as in physical chemical properties of milk and meat. Bluntly said, whether an animal is lame, yes or no, the meat and milk still tastes the same. But again, consumer perspective and perception is changing, but also farmers' perspective, same. Is I think there's very little farmers that actually like seeing, well, at least that's my experience, like seeing their animals lame in their farm, but it boils down to lack of time, knowledge, and just equipment or personnel to efficiently get everything done on a dairy farm. And then the other thing is recording somatic cell count. And then I'm always jealous of colleague researchers in the other health field, but somatic cell count is well kept, well recorded. There is automated data collection that's used, that's processed. It's the milk processing unit, the retailers. It gets used through the entire chain. When we're talking about hoof health, there's just a general lack. Why? There's data collection programs, but also no one or very few people actually do something with data that gets collected, which is a huge or a very important tool to be able to give very concrete and efficient advice to a farmer, but also show him progress that he makes by changing some behaviors and changing some small management steps on his dairy farm. And there's multiple opportunities, but I won't go further into that to keep it brief. So what's next for ClawCare in Belgium? So this coming year, I'll finish all the work I have planned for the preventive hoof trimming, and it's going to be both on live animals and cadaver feet. Live animals, I created a platform where the pressure mat is embedded into, and we can measure the pressure on the back feet or front feet of animals before they go into hoof trim and crush. And the idea is to follow them up to see how it evolves over time. But also another deliverable or endpoint for ClawCare is that we're going to start a training and teaching environment at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. And because I'm a veterinarian and I work closely with, for example, the Department of Surgery, we'll be able to cover the entirety of the let's say first line stakeholders in the dairy industry, that's farmers, hoof trimmers, and veterinarians, and provide them support in training, teaching, just to improve their knowledge, but also their skill to tackle lameness on dairy farms. Biggest advantages: I speak 3 languages: English, Dutch, and French. French is actually my native language. So for Belgium, it helps a lot because the southern part of Belgium is French speaking. But also English and Dutch is also a major advantage. Dutch opens up the Netherlands, French also opens up France. And 3 languages is a good start. I might learn a 4th one. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring it out if I should or not. And then further perspectives for ClawCare is also continue with research, and both at a national level for Flanders and Wallonia, but it'd be nice if we could go a step higher at international level and work with other European countries and stakeholders to try and improve and tackle lameness in an evidence-based way, because currently this is what I see a lot in the field, and this doesn't matter which country it's in. A lot of it is expert opinion, and most of it, for a farmer, for example, just to give you an idea, the first person they ask something about hoof health, it's not the veterinarian, it's either the hoof trimmer, if there is a hoof trimmer, or the second one who's asked questions about hoof health is the guy who works for the feeding company. The downside is the guy that works for the feeding company, his advice will never be neutral. It's always commercially tied to something. And in the past, and this is not only me, but other colleagues, we see that the advices that get given or provided by some of those representatives isn't always what the farm or farmer needs at that moment. It's not necessarily wrong, but sometimes it's not the first or the best advice or the actual advice the farmer needs, which leads to lameness not being solved, which leads to frustration because the farmer ends paying for a lot of it without seeing any improvement. So it creates frustration, which that frustration leads to also in a lot of farmers, they tend to be like, oh yeah, well, if I spent this amount of thousands of euros to try and solve this problem, it didn't work, well, then I'd probably never be able to solve it. And then they tend to be more they tend to be desensitized to lameness a little bit, and it also doesn't motivate them to try and tackle it on their farm any further because they tried something, they spent a lot of money, it didn't work, and the situation stayed the same, and that's a shame, I think. And then finally, to finish it off, footbaths, and that's Inagro who's working on it, where I think it's best to give the word to Sandra, if she's the one mainly involved with it, and she'll be way better placed to tell you what they've been working on and some of their results so far.
Okay, thank you, William. And so at Inagro, we are working on a work package about active substances that are often used in footbaths or claw baths for dairy cattle. So we are working on suspension tests. It's lab work, so in vitro work, where we test active substances on Treponema species, because Treponema is often found in Mortellaro lesions. For our study, the goal is to test in vitro the effects of different active substances on the growth of Treponema. And of course, in claw baths, there is often feces coming into the baths when cows passes the claw bath. So we also want to know if there is an effect of feces on the efficacy of active substances. So a first study we performed is a suspension test with Treponema bryanthi. This is actually a Treponema species that is found in the rumen of cows. We tried to cultivate other Treponema species that were found in claw lesions, but without success. So this in vitro study was performed with Treponema bryanthi. We incubated this Treponema with single active substances, and we followed up the growth of Treponema with OD measurements, optical density measurements. So this is actually a certain tool that can determine the growth of the Treponema. There were 3 active substances that are often used in claw baths that could not be measured with OD measurements: copper sulfate, didecyl dimethyl ammonium chloride, and chlorhexidine. Here you have a table with different products that we used in the study. Formalin, this is one that is often used in claw baths, but this is actually toxic, carcinogenic for users. Glutaraldehyde, acetic acid, citric acid, lactic acid, and peracetic acids. Thymol is also sometimes used to treat lesions at the claws. Sodium omadine, propylene glycol, and sodium bicarbonate. You see that several concentrations were tested for each products, and then we checked with the OD measurements which products and at which concentration the product was effective to decrease the growth of the Treponema. Sometimes we had a trend, so this means that we could see some decrease of the growth of the bacterial species, but statistically we could not say that it really worked. And then others that were not effective. Then the last 2 columns, if the product was effective to reduce the growth of Treponema, we checked if feces could have a negative effect on this or not. If feces was included, then maybe the product didn't work anymore or didn't work that much. So for formalin, as we expected, it was effective, and feces had no negative effect. So yeah, this is actually a very good product, but it's carcinogenic. So we are searching for other alternatives. If we check glutaraldehyde, we see that there was a trend for a lower growth of the bacterial species, and feces had no effect. Then we see the acids. Actually, it's more or less the same between the different acids. At a low concentration, you have a lower effect. If you increase the concentration, you have a higher effect of the products. And also the feces at lower concentration, there can be a negative effect of feces, and with a higher concentration, there is no effect of feces anymore. But of course, you cannot increase the concentration too high because it's also not good for the claws. Thymol, it had a trend for good effects on the treponema, and there was an effect of feces. So this product is not that good. Sodium omadine is effective, and there's no effect of feces, so this is a good product. Then propylene glycol and sodium bicarbonate, they are effective, but unfortunately, there is a negative effect of feces. So this is what we did already with this work package. What we want to do now is to do the in vitro study again, but test combinations of active substances. When you check the different active substances in products to use in claw baths, you see that often you have combinations of active substances. So this is what we want to do next. You saw that some products we could not test, like copper sulfate, that is also often used. This is actually also not a good product as it's bad for the environment, but you also want to include this in the study to search for good alternatives. So for all those products which we could not test, we also want to include qPCR. This checks the DNA of the bacterial species, so we can see if there is more DNA or less DNA during the study. So we can check if the bacterial species can still grow with the active substances or not. So this is what is on the planning later on in this project. So now we are at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm not sure if you have some questions, some remarks, you can let us know, and then we are glad to answer your questions. Yes, Maria?
Yeah, thank you very much for very interesting presentation. When William presented these results of survey, I was surprised that Eastern Europe is completely not active in this area.
Well, it's probably because so that's the thing is hoof tumors, and that was the biggest challenge, is the language. So I had my surveys translated in a lot of, well, 6 different languages, and most of them I did myself. But the challenge is the hoof tumors who are probably active in Eastern Europe. It's hard to reach them. Just on I know, well, in the hoof trimming community, it's very few of them, I have the impression. And language is the biggest challenge. Is, for example, I think in Poland there's probably quite a big hoof trimming community, but I don't speak Polish and I don't really have access to someone who could. So that's, if possible, I'd like to do this again, but on a bigger scale, just to try and figure out every European country that would be part of a project like this, just to figure out how many hoof trimmers are active, just as a first question, to see what structure there is, what resources they have or have access to, but also to see, is this theoretically enough to trim, for example, the dairy cows that are in their country? Because that's, for example, in Belgium, we have 500,000 dairy cows. If you just think preventive trimming them, which is twice a year, which at least should be twice a year, that's 1 million trims a year. Yeah, you need a lot of hoof trimmers to, and that's only hoof, but it's a combination of farmers, and then also, yeah, reaching farmers is another story. This is just a start. So yeah, of course, I'm missing probably quite a big community from Eastern Europe, but that's just because reaching them is a challenge because of the language barrier, especially Eastern Europe. The languages are so different from each other. For example, because I speak French, for me, Italian and Spanish make sense, but Polish or Slovenian, Czech, Serbian, it's going to be a completely different story. But for the future, it could be very interesting. If there is interest from other countries, I know with the University of Ghent, we have a good collaboration with people in Poland. Could be interesting to see if we could go for something, yeah, like in the entirety of Europe, just to see what's going on, what's the current state, and how can we improve this in the next 5 to 10 years, just to make sure that it's possible to support dairy farmers to improve hoof health on their farms. So that's the biggest challenge right now here in Flanders, at least, but also in the Netherlands. Farmers are stuck with we don't always find a hoof trimmer, and if we find one, we don't always know if he delivers good or quality work. And that's also partly if you link back to the results I showed from the lameness perception. If an untrained person doesn't recognize the lame cow, imagine a healthy cow goes in the hoof trimming crush, she gets trimmed and she comes out lame. If she's not severely lame, the farmer's not going to recognize it. An untrained person's not going to see that cow as lame, so he thinks, oh, trimmer did a good job. But the reality, and that's what I see when working with people in the UK, is the reality sometimes is different. Is they know some hoof trimmers aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it causes issues on dairy farms. So yeah, I know it's a challenge, and it's a limitation of the results in the study I have. But as far as I know, also I'd have to get in touch with some people in Poland, for example, or other countries if there is an association for hoof trimmers. But language remains the biggest challenge, because the majority of these people don't have a level of English proficient enough to be part or to participate to a type of study like this. Which, yeah, I'd need to have it translated in a lot of different languages. Which, yeah, that's the challenge. Language.
I know that in Austria they are very active in this area, and there is one veterinarian, Robert Pessenhofer,
yeah,
which also organize these hoof trimming trainings in our country. Mm-hmm. So
and in which country is it? Sorry,
Austria.
Yeah, but which country are you from?
From Slovenia.
That's good. Slovenia. Actually, I have a colleague of mine, Barbara Beshi. She's
Barbara is in the Netherlands, huh? Or in Belgium.
She's my colleague. She works with me. Slovenia.
I know her. I know her, and I know her family. So okay. Yeah, I know. But we are very interesting to be part of such study, and that perhaps in Eastern Europe needs to communicate with breeding organizations. Mm-hmm. Because there are people which work in this area.
Yeah. But this, so next week I'll be in Spain at the summer. There's a hoof trimming conference in Spain, and for example, I know Katarzyna. She's the head of the Polish Breeder Association, and I'll ask her the same question, because I think this could be very interesting. Because Eastern Europe, honestly, I think dairy-wise, it's going to be the future of Europe. As we see how it's evolving here in Western Europe, everything is shifting more toward Eastern Europe, because there is demand, and there is room, there is space, and people are investing in it. And here we see that the size of dairy or farms is going to have to change in the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, could be very interesting to have it on time and have a framework set up just to make sure that purely hoof trimming and lameness is there is something. But that's a very good idea. I'll see if I can get in touch. And I think if you want to, well, if we can get in touch, you can always send me an email. I'll give you my email address in the chat.
Perfect, please. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Are there other questions?
Sandra,
Yes, Maria.
if you permit me, I think
Yes.
this topic is very important also regarding the society and consumers.
Yeah.
Society is very sensitive when they see that cows has problem with locomotion and walking. So I think we need to put more efforts in more also we need skills and knowledge to prevent these problems.
Yeah, it's but the challenge, and that's the unfortunate truth also about lameness. If you look at mastitis, and I'm talking about funding. Funding wise, for example, for mastitis, you have the entire pharmaceutical industry that has a huge return on investment. Why? Well, but this is also changing. With the EU regulation of selective dry therapy, this has changed. But for lameness, that's also the pharmaceutical industry. Their return on investment is painkillers, and that's it. But even then, because hoof trimmers aren't allowed to use painkillers, and because it's not widely known that you should use painkillers for lameness, I notice funding is the biggest challenge when we're talking about lameness, because lameness research costs a lot of money. You need to have the right people who are trained. You need the equipment. You need a good hoof trimming crush. It takes time. Data collection takes time. You can't get, having data from an entire farm. You need to do an entire herd pedicure if you want to have lesions. So it's, unfortunately, lameness research is very, very time consuming and expensive. And that's one thing I noticed within the ClawCare project. That's also, it's a big project, but to be able to do it more efficiently, looking back on the last 3 years, it should have been twice as big. I'd say I'm lucky that I love doing what I do, being with cows and doing hoof trimming, collecting data, going on farms. And that's the biggest challenge, is I'm on my own right now. But with this at the faculty, we'd like to go further. And that's why I said on a European level. But funding will always be a big challenge. I know, and I don't know how to solve that. I don't know if on a European level or in other countries there are funding opportunities for this. But this is just me from my experience giving you tackling lameness. It's an investment, but farmers who do it, so farmers who have a good hoof trimmer, it costs them money, but it generates them a lot of money too, because their cows stay longer, they get older, they produce more milk, and they have less constraints. So it's there is a good return on investment for a farmer investing in hoof health. But for research projects, I know funding is a challenge. And I'm not on the European level. I don't know how easy or challenging it is to start European projects, and how funding looks like on that field. So, but I absolutely agree. There should be, it's becoming more and more of a hot topic for consumers, for dairy farmers, and also for other stakeholders. But communication about it is always very delicate, because you are dealing with animal welfare data that can be used in a very negative way. That's why with farmers, I try and show the change over a certain period. I think that's a better way of communicating than to just show, well, this farm has 50% lame cows, blah, blah, blah. No, just show that in a year's time, by doing very small changes, you can reduce lameness from 50% to, for example, 15 to 20%. So that's it's a more efficient way of communicating, I think, than just being hell bent on saying, oh, 50% lame cows and it's bad. And but you need, for that, you need data. You need some form of data to be able to show change. And that's the biggest challenge right now is there is very little data recorded and used to inform also what farmers are doing on their farm.
Are there other questions? I don't see anything in the chat or a hand. So I think we can close this webinar. Thank you very much, William, for giving your presentation and all the information you gave us. And thank you everyone for being here and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sandra,
very
also
much.
to you. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Have a nice day.